Welcome to Encountering Wisdom. The reason that this podcast exists is really based on my desire to infuse more wisdom into the world. I'm not talking just about stories that help satisfy intellectual curiosity, but wisdom that can help shape a deeper understanding of ourselves, our relationships with other people, and with the planet. And I tend to gravitate towards guests who have some kind of a spiritual or contemplative practice because it leads to a deeper sense of self-understanding and extends into broader relationships. And I'm excited today to introduce my guest, Baruch. And Baruch, I'm going to turn it over to you and ask you to say a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Bruce. Appreciate being invited and excited to have a conversation. So I also have a connection with Bruce because every time I'm at Starbucks, Baruch doesn't come out so well. So I think half the time I'm Bruce. So we have something in common there. You want me to give you like the snapshot of my life? I don't know.
Please.
30,000 foot view.
Yeah.
I'll sum up 53 years and 30 seconds because I know that's the hook these days. So was born and raised Omaha, Nebraska. Culturally Jewish, but always hungry spiritually, relevant to your show, and didn't find it in my own tradition. Ended up seeking it in other people's isms, Buddhism, Hinduism, a little bit of shamanism, other Catholic mysticism, and still very enamored with all of those practices. I'd like to think of myself as a spiritual mutt, but I did finally go home to Judaism, and eventually I became a rabbi. Did that for 20 years, and decided I wanted to extract out spirituality and bring that to the world, to the masses. And so for the past 10 years, my wife and I, Ariella, have been starting to ramp up this organization we call Soul Centered, a center for spirituality, meaning, and healing. And so that's one of my passions. And my other passion is working with men to discover spirituality, meaning, and healing in their lives. So I do that as a coach, as a logotherapist. That's meaning-centered psychotherapy. And then interweaving it all with spirituality.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, we've got a lot to talk about.
All right.
I'll tell you, one of the topics that I think is, it's interesting to me personally, partly based on my own personal experience with my father, and to some extent based on my experience with my own son and raising him, but it's the complexity of the father-son relationship, and how, hierarchical and belief systems can oftentimes get in the way of the development of that relationship. And I think if there's anything I would want for this session to be, it would be to speak to fathers and perhaps help them gain a deeper understanding of the complexities of that relationship and how best they can navigate raising a son, particularly in a society where there's such a stress on social media and education, and so little stress on self-understanding.
Oh, such an important topic. Thank you for raising it.
Yeah.
The first thing that comes to mind for me is in masculine developmental work, especially a teacher of mine. Her name is Allison Armstrong. She talks about the king, the prince, the knight, and the page, drawing from medieval times as developmental stages. And the page is boyhood. The knight is that teen, 20 something, but it can continue long after that. Prince is settling down, settling in, and those are almost givens. But the last stage, the king, is not given; it's earned. To become a king isn't biological or isn't the chronology of your time, but it's the efforts, it's the work that you do on yourself and within your kingdom. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges I see today is we have so few men who are consciously becoming kings. And I say that because without that king, without that center, you can call it a patriarch, whatever you want to call it. I know that's not the most popular term these days, but how do you pass that down? How do you learn it as a young man coming up, right? I can learn about being a knight by being around other knights and having adventures. And princes, I look around and I see that that's what my contemporaries are doing. But to become a king, I need to be shown. I need to be taught. And I didn't have that. And so my primary mission was and is in life is to be that for my family, my wife, my 4 children, and especially for my sons, so that they know what it means to become a king, to become a true man and all that that embodies.
Yeah. So I'd love to peel that back a little bit. King is a complex word. It has different connotations. Kings have ruled in various ways. So I'm assuming when you talk about developmental movement towards kinghood, it's what I would call the best and highest qualities that we associate with being a ruler. And maybe you could explain a little bit more about what those qualities are.
Yeah, there's some, Jung would say there's shadow qualities to these are archetypes, these are primal energies. It's not, it's not just me or people grabbing onto this. That's why it's in movies and throughout history. And so there's the high side and the low side, or the light and the shadow. And Jung would say there's 2 shadows, polar opposites, but both shadowy. The tyrant, which is, right, I think what you're describing, but there's also the weakling. Right, the weakling king, who is emasculator, allows himself to be emasculated, who doesn't have order. The 3 primary activities of a king are order, structure, to have rules and values, and right, that's a necessary piece to operate a kingdom. And the kingdom could be your home, it could be your relationships, it could be your business, whatever it is. You got to have structure. Generativity. Right, a creative quality and capacity. That's what a true king does. And he instills that in other people. He inspires people to want to create, to contribute. It's empowering. It's not disempowering. And the third one would be blessing, right? True blessing, not, like some reciting a line, but in Hebrew, the word Baruch, my name, means power. It means blessing, but it really means to extract out power, to empower. And so when I look at my son, who's here in the studio right now, and I bless him, I recognize his potential and name it for him, help him understand it, and now help him sort of inspire him to start moving towards realizing his potential. And that's blessing. And so, you can call, if king's uncomfortable for a listener, change the title. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But those are the 3 attributes that I believe a man who's moving into this phase of, fathering and being a king and needs to instill in his the people around him. And how do we know how to do that? We're supposed to learn it, but nobody's really teaching us.
Yeah. I think that's really insightful, Baruch. Thank you. The word that came to mind in terms of King Lee was compassion. Because I think the best rulers, the people who garner the most respect, who earn the most respect, have that quality, and it's very evident in their behavior and how they interact with others. That's one observation. The second observation I had from what you said was there's a contrast between a father who blesses his son and a father who thinks he's blessing his son by controlling his son.
Yeah.
And I think it might be interesting to help some of our male listeners in particular understand how to distinguish and differentiate between those two, because I think some men in particular have a hard time understanding the difference between control and true blessing.
So such a good distinction. I agree with you. Compassion is a key characteristic of a true king or a father or whatever you want to call it. And then, by the way, Jung would say those are sort of the same umbrella archetypes. They're just nuances of the same energy.
Yeah.
And I love the word compassion, and then we'll jump off into the other point. Cum is Latin for with, and passion is pati, suffering. And so it's being with somebody in their suffering, right? And not trying to fix it. That was my job as a prince. I thought I was trying to fix my wife, fix my kids.
Right.
You probably heard this too, like stop trying to fix me, right? A king understands that I can't make the suffering go away, but I can be with you through it. I can hold the suffering. And that's really my job as a coach, as a therapist, and I work exclusively with men, and with my role with my kids and my boys in particular, is I can hold the space and not have to make it go away and allow you to be where you need to be. And to me, that's the difference between controlling and blessing, right? I'm not going to try and a lot of times controlling, by the way, comes from a good place. I'm scared.
Sure.
I don't want you to suffer.
Right.
So let me tell you what you need to do and mask it in the form of fatherly advice, control, as opposed to, I got 4 kids, I mentioned, 2 boys. My 2 boys are very different. And my job is to help them see their gifts and set them on a course for them to be able to pursue them on their terms. But they have very different paths. And I would like to step in and have more of a guiding hand, but I've really had to learn, especially with the younger one. I think the older one took a few hits along the way and working some shit out. Sorry, I don't know if I can swear on you. Some stuff out on him. But can I start to see him, all my kids, and give them the tools, the resources, the inspiration they need, and then allow them to make their choices? That to me is a blessing.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, a similar journey with the raising of my own son. I've had to do a lot of growing as a father to understand and begin to differentiate between how I could best support him, how I could show him compassion, how I could show him acceptance, even in the midst of his suffering, when I really wanted to just wave a magic wand and take it away and show him how to take it away. And I think for some of the listeners out there who are in the process of raising kids, I feel like this is a relatively common journey amongst fathers, and the objective, how do we help support those fathers in their journey towards being the king, the father king, the compassionate father who holds that space?
I think the number one thing for me is I can't teach what I don't have. I can't give what I don't have. I got to do this work, right? The number one way to get your kids to go to college, go to college. Statistically, the number one way to get your kids to stop smoking, don't smoke.
Yeah.
Right? The number one way to show them how to be a king, a father, a true man, whatever you want to call it, be that. Well, that takes work. That doesn't just happen.
Right. And
that's my job. People say, what do you do? My response sometimes is, I am working on becoming a king. I think, oh my God, the guy's nuts, right? Sounds like Donald Trump or something.
Yeah.
And what I get paid. You're asking how I get paid. Because, that's what we mean when we're talking to guys. What do you do? How do you make money? No, that's how I make money. But what I do is all these things to become the type of man that my children and my wife and the people around me say, that's a good man.
Right.
And that doesn't just happen. And
right.
We're all works in progress. And so that's the number one thing I say to guys, because I work with these guys, and a lot of times they'll come to me and say, I can't make time for this. I can't do this. I can't afford this. And my response is, you can't afford not to. But this is a gift, you doing this work to your wife and to your kids. And I don't think most men think that way.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a fair point. So let's talk about it from the perspective of the sons who might be listening, who got, let's say, complex relationships with their fathers. How would you approach them? How would you speak to them about this situation?
I don't really think it's possible not to have a complex relationship with your father, even if you have father knows best father, right? Or Ward Cleaver from back in our era, because they're by definition complex, right? And that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. I always say that I never have fights with the barista at Starbucks. I go there every day, and she gives me a latte, and I give her my $27 for the latte. And it's, I want to get pissed, but I don't because I need it. But it's just very simple. It's not complex. And we don't get into fights. My wife and I, love of my life, we go deep, and we also get into serious fights. So that isn't a sign of, that it's not a negative, right? It's a sign of a complex relationship. So I start there. Because people want to say, my family's dysfunctional. Show me a family that's not dysfunctional.
Right.
Or alternatively, show me a family that's functional. I mean, I'm a student of theology, and the Bible is a case study in dysfunctionality.
Yeah.
So like, to me, that's a baseline. Oh, I'm not the only one who's kind of screwing up here. So that's a starting point. The second point is, I know there's different degrees of complexity. Sounds like maybe you have similar to mine, but mine's very complex with my deceased father. I mean, damaging complex. I just wrote a book on it, but he killed himself and he left me with all his bags.
Yeah.
Right. He checked out and he thought he was doing everybody a favor when in fact he was just parking his darkness onto my doorstep. So talk about complex.
Yeah.
And to me, that's a starting point of let's look at what we're handing down. And that's, I guess, comes back to my first point, which is do your work, unpack your bags.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
As an act of love and compassion to your children, to your loved ones. I don't know if I answered the question, but let's keep digging in on it.
No, I think you did. And I'm thinking about the sons who've been the recipient of these bags that have been parked on their doorstep. Not necessarily because their father's deceased; he may still be alive.
Yeah.
And I read an article recently where one son refused to continue a relationship with his father, and refused his father the right to see his own grandchild because his father had supported and was continuing to support Donald Trump as president of the United States. And in my way of thinking, that is unfathomable. That you've got this meaningful relationship, admittedly complex, and yet there's a willingness to throw all that away over a political difference. And I'm thinking to myself, how did that happen? Why did that happen? How did that become so important an issue for you that you feel as though you have to protect yourself and your child from that exposure? Versus finding some path, even if it's a path with a mutual understanding that we have a relationship, we differ in our views. We're not going to talk about those things. Mm-hmm. We're going to talk about things that create common ground between us.
Yeah, that is deeply disturbing. That's called cancel culture, right?
Yeah.
I hate cancel culture because what you're doing is you're turning you're turning somebody into an other.
Right.
It's dehumanization. It's reducing somebody to, this criteria. And, I wear this number right here, 119104, and then I have all these other numbers. These are dead family members from the Holocaust. They were reduced to numbers.
Right.
Their totality, their humanism was labeled. And that's what we're talking about here. Maybe this is more extreme, but this has consequences when you reduce your own father to a political affiliation.
Yeah.
You're not seeing the blood, sweat, tears, toil, everything that went into making it possible for you to be here. But even if that weren't true and you were just the sperm that won the race, right? You still owe him a debt of gratitude.
Yeah.
That doesn't terminate the relationship. But I fear that that's partially the world we're living in, where it's transactional.
Right.
Right? As opposed to value-based.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm a big fan of talking about values, communicating values.
Yeah.
There's so many of the men I know say that their family knows their values. I'm like, do they? Like, have you communicated your own values to yourself? And I think, again, I guess I'm stuck on this theme of so many men don't know who they are, what their true purpose is. My teacher and mentor, Viktor Frankl, would say they don't know their why.
Right.
And so when you get back to these core value conversations, it's impossible to cancel another human being because we may, like you said, we may disagree on all the ways we express some of those values, but if we can connect on the core values, we're bonded.
Yeah.
And so my family, my sons in particular, and I talk a lot about values to the point where one of my family members was talking about their sexual identity and asked how I'd feel if they were gay. I couldn't care less because that's not a value.
Mm-hmm.
That's a sexual orientation,
Right.
right? I want to talk about your values. And I
Yeah.
think they were quite shocked that to me it was just, I'm happy to talk about it for sure, but there's nothing to debate about, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing to dialogue over there. So I guess my point is, like, let's come back to fathers and sons communicating who they are, why they're here, what they stand for. I don't know what my grandfathers were all about. I could guess, I could surmise, right? Maybe they dropped hints. We never once sat down and they said to me, hey, son, like, here's who I am. Who are you?
Yeah.
Right? I don't know. I'm still guessing, and they've been dead for 20 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's fascinating. Cancel culture. I think this is a huge issue in our society. I think, social media is on the bleeding edge of it.
Mm-hmm.
24/7 news, dating apps, all contribute to this concept of ghosting and hiding behind some anonymous identity to speak out what you want instead of having the courage to do it face to face. And one of the I'm going to veer off here for a second onto another topic that is of real importance to me, and that is the state that we're leaving the planet in for the next generation.
Mm-hmm.
And how this cancel culture, and particularly the Anglo-Saxon view of the world, it's not prevalent in some other parts of the world, but certainly in the U.S., there's this culture of throwing things away. Like it's with me now to serve the convenience of what I feel I need right now. And when it doesn't serve that convenience anymore, I can just throw it away. Mm-hmm. And single-use plastics is a metaphor for that. Mm-hmm. We are choking the planet in plastic. Mm-hmm. And so much of it has to do with this culture of convenience and the fact that we've somehow started to believe that it's okay to throw things away and to waste. I have a 94-year-old aunt who I have breakfast with on most Sundays. And when we order breakfast, she always orders bacon, crispy, but she never eats all of her bacon. And she always takes the extra bacon and wraps it in a napkin and brings it home. She can easily afford her own bacon, but she's got this leftover understanding of the Depression era and what it was like to grow up when you didn't have access to everything you wanted. And we've somehow lost that. And I think there's a tie-in here to the values that you're speaking about, to the king concept, that persona. And just wondering if you want to comment there.
Oh, it's a great topic, and a lot to go with there. Let's start with cancel culture, because I think they're tied together. And cancel culture, maybe a teacher of mine once said, is reducing a man, and usually it's men, to their single worst moment. Right? Because you could have a bank account filled with good deeds and you did a bad thing. My father canceled himself. It's called suicide.
Yeah.
Right? He added up the math in his bank account, literal bank account, and said it didn't add up. So therefore, I'm not worth being here.
Right.
I'm going to cancel myself. Well, that's what we're doing in these transactional relationships, because we're not zooming out and taking a long view, right? Which is how I think, and I know you're quite versed in indigenous people and cultures and tribes who never saw themselves as discrete moments in time. They're part of a collective. It didn't begin with them. It won't end with them. And so we've lost that ability to sort of see the whole, the forest for the trees. In Judaism, Judaism has a lot of challenges. One thing it does really well is think in terms of generations. Mm-hmm. How do generationally we evolve And so one generation, plants a tree, even if they're never going to see the tree because they know their great grandchildren will benefit from the tree. And that's a metaphor, but that translates into other areas of thinking long term. And so really cancel culture to me is losing perspective, losing sight of the whole. So that's a part of it. And I think that does take us into a environmental conversation. But the other piece of it is, I don't think we have an environmental problem. I think we have a meaning problem, because what I see is ordering Amazon is filling a void, right? I have an emptiness. I'm trying to fill it, buying things, super duper vacations. Everybody's out vacationing each other. And, all of it is, a teacher of mine calls avoidance, a void dance, a dance around the void. And if you're dancing around the void, you just keep churning and burning and going and buying and throwing away. And it's never enough because the void is insatiable.
Right.
And so I think one of the ways that we deal with some of these issues like environmentalism is get people back to a true purpose, right? What's your why? Why are you here? Really? Because once you get into that, the Amazon boxes stop coming quite so fast.
Mm-hmm.
And the vacations aren't that important.
Right.
And everything slows down and it gets more thoughtful and it gets back to these core values. So that's my take on how we improve the environment.
Yeah, and I'm 100% in agreement with you. I don't think we are going to improve the environment until people are willing to understand more about who they are. And from there comes an understanding of how they want to behave in relationships, how they want to behave towards one another and towards the planet.
Yeah, we end up always talking about the how. So let's come up with a better recycling program.
Yeah.
Viktor Frankl said, paraphrasing Nietzsche, got him through the Holocaust, he who has a why to live for can bear with almost any how. We have a why problem, not a how problem.
Yeah.
Because we can come up with new recycling programs and then we're just going to fill those new bins with more Amazon boxes.
Yeah.
Or we can talk about, well, why are we buying so much?
Yeah.
Because we don't have spiritual practices and religions and fraternal orders and community and blah, blah, blah. Well, fine, then let's put our attention on that.
Right. Yeah. No, that's great. Look, it's been great chatting with you. I've really enjoyed our dialogue and really appreciate you sharing your hard-earned self-understanding and wisdom with whoever our listeners are today.
Well, thank you. I don't feel like I adequately addressed your father-son topic, but I hope it was an interesting diversion.
It was very interesting. I liked your concept of the personas, and if we get some good feedback, then it's something we can always delve into in the future.
Sounds good. If our Nielsen ratings are good enough, I'll be back. All right. I love it.
Good.
Thanks, Bruce.
Thank you, Baruch.
All right.
Yeah.